What do you do when what you have isn't enough? Have you ever looked at something that's happening in your life and thought, I don't have enough? I don't have enough time. I don't have enough energy. I don't have enough patience. Maybe it's things like, I don't know enough, or I'm not experienced enough, not strong enough. Or maybe I just don't have what it takes to deal with this. I think that's one of the reasons that the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 is so psychologically interesting in today's gospel. So let's talk more about it today on Gospel Minded. Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Welcome to Gospel Minded, an outreach of Benedictus Psychological Services. Check out that website, benedictuspsych.com. Each week here on Gospel Minded, we spend a few minutes talking about psychology, emotions, mental health, and well-being, and we reflect on how these important topics are related to the Sunday Gospel reading each week. Now, I always point out this isn't a substitute for actually getting yourself to church or participating in counseling, therapy, spiritual direction, or mentoring, if you're involved with those sort of things. But like we know so well, and like we have seen time after time, so often things of our psychology go together beautifully with our spirituality. So if this is your first time seeing this channel, welcome. If you're coming back, welcome back. Either way, I hope that you will like this video and then subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode of Gospel Minded. So here we are, Matthew's Gospel today, the feeding of the 5,000. The disciples are confronted with this problem, and it's a problem that in their mind I think is just simply too big. And what happens next has a lot to teach us about how we respond when what we have doesn't seem to match the size of the problem. So Matthew 14 begins with something that we can easily overlook, and that is the passage starts with Jesus having just learned about the death of John the Baptist. Pretty jarring. So Jesus gets into a boat and he withdraws to a deserted place. In other words, Jesus is grieving. He needs some time to grieve. And yet, when Jesus arrives, there's this huge crowd that's waiting for him. And Matthew makes a note to tell us, he says, he had compassion for them. Jesus had compassion for this crowd. So think about this for a minute. Here's Jesus now hurting, grieving, having just learned about the death of his friend, and yet he sees all these other people who have got needs, and he responds to them with compassion. Now, I don't think the psychological lesson here is that we should ignore our pain. I mean, that's not a healthy thing. In fact, for all of us, grief is something that we need to work through and experience, and the pain that we may feel in the midst of loss should be acknowledged. And in fact, sometimes we need to step away from the demands of others so that we can recover. Absolutely. But there's something beautiful here in this gospel. Jesus is showing that our own suffering doesn't necessarily prevent us from caring about someone else. In fact, sometimes our experiences of suffering can make us even more sensitive to the suffering, the hurting, the grief, and the needs of others. So Jesus, in the midst of all of this, sees the crowd. Then Matthew says he begins to heal them. And this is going on, and eventually it becomes nighttime. Evening arrives, and the disciples come to Jesus with what seems like a very reasonable problem and a decent solution. The disciples are essentially saying, it's getting late here, let's just get these people out so they can go home, go off wherever and get something to eat. And honestly, if I am putting myself in the shoes of the disciples, this seems like a pretty reasonable thing. There are thousands of people who've come to this deserted place. It's getting dark, it's late, and there's no food. So I can definitely see the thought of the disciples. They look at the situation and are essentially saying, this is too much. This problem is too big. But Jesus says something different. In fact, maybe kind of strange. If you're a disciple hearing this, he says there's no need for the crowd to go away. You give them something to eat. You give them something to eat. And the disciples, the response is, we have nothing but the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. Now, I love that sentence and the way that Matthew writes it. It's almost like you can hear the puzzle or the incredulous sort of approach that the disciples have. Like, what do you want us to do, Lord, with these 5 loaves and 2 fish? I mean, look at this. This is what we've got, and there are thousands of people here. It's not enough. Not by a long shot. Right. So a big problem. What's the solution? I mean, from a practical standpoint, the disciples are right. It's not enough. But the disciples, I wonder if they're looking at the size of the problem and then they're comparing it to the size of the resources that they have available. And when the problem is much bigger than the resources that are available, I think something interesting can happen psychologically, and that is we get overwhelmed. If there's a problem that is so big that we don't have the resources or the capacity to feel like we can really adequately deal with it, it gets very easy to get overwhelmed. And then we begin to focus on what's missing. We think things like, I don't have enough time to deal with this. I don't have the energy to deal with this. I don't know what to say. I can't fix this situation. I can't change this scenario right now. Perhaps it could be something like, I'm the only person here. What difference could I, as one person, possibly make against this overwhelmingly big problem? These are the kinds of things that we think when we get overwhelmed, and that is exactly where the disciples are with this gospel passage today. It's late, they see thousands of hungry people, and what they've got are 5 loaves and 2 fish. The math isn't mathing. But notice what Jesus does. He doesn't tell them, well, actually, you've got plenty. You've got everything you need right here. No, because there really isn't enough. But what Jesus says instead is this: bring them here to me. What you have, bring it to me. And I think that is the really important distinction and the point that's worth discussing today. This idea that Christianity doesn't require us to pretend that the limitations we have aren't real. Because, in fact, the limitations that we have are very real things. Sometimes we really don't have enough. We may not really have enough time or enough energy. We may not have enough knowledge to really deal with something. We may not have control to deal with the situation, and we may not have the resources to really adequately address things. And sometimes it can be the case that the problem we confront really is bigger than me, bigger than us. So then the question becomes, well, then what do you do with what you actually have? Jesus takes the 5 loaves, the 2 fish, and then he tells the people to sit down. All right, now this might seem like an insignificant detail here, but just think about what's happening. if you will. So there are thousands of people. They've been here for a while now. It's getting late. They're getting hungry, maybe hangry. Everybody knows there's a problem. And Jesus then creates, in the midst of this scene, structure. Sit down. Okay? Sit down. There's something just, I think, psychologically important about that. In the midst of all of this, Jesus is bringing some order. So, like when life becomes chaotic, sometimes the first thing we need isn't a perfect solution, but maybe it's just to sit down, slow things down a second. Let's take a breath. Let's get a little bit of structure. Let's figure out what resources we actually have available. What do we really have to work with? And then we can take the next step. I think when we feel overwhelmed, we have this desire to want to solve the entire problem immediately, right now. When I think so often the better question is, what can I do next? What's the next thing that I can actually do? Not, how am I going to fix everything? Look at this. How can I get this taken care of? No. Just, what's the next step? Sit down a second. Let's just pause. Let's see what I've actually got to work with. And so then this happens in the gospel passage, and then Jesus does something else. He takes the bread, he takes the fish, and then he gives thanks. He gives thanks. Before the disciples know how this is going to work out, Jesus gives gratitude for the little bit that is there. And I think this is another important psychological lesson to think about. That our sense of gratitude, it shouldn't just mean like pretending that the problem doesn't exist. Like, it's not like we've got to say 5 loaves and 2 fish is plenty to feed the 5,000, because it's not. That's not it at all. And gratitude as well, it's not a denial, but gratitude, as Jesus is showing here, gives thanks. Gratitude simply says, this is what I have. This is what I can offer. And that matters. So, giving gratitude for what I actually have, very important. Because sometimes we can become so focused on the things that we don't have that we stop paying attention to what we actually do have. And maybe you don't actually need everything, because you actually have something. Maybe you have a relationship. Maybe you have a skill to offer. You have another day. You have a friend. You have the ability to ask for help. You have the ability to take just one more step. You have something you can offer. And I can't help but think that sometimes that's where the resilience is, in recognizing those things that we actually do have. Resilience doesn't come by saying, I have everything I need. No. But by recognizing I don't have everything, but I can use what I do have. And so then in the gospel passage, something else happens in the midst of this story. Jesus takes the 5 loaves, he takes the 2 fish, he gives thanks, and then he distributes and gives the food to the disciples. And the disciples then give it to the crowd. And this keeps happening over and over. Jesus is involving the disciples, he's involving the crowd, he's giving them this task to pass along, to keep distributing. The fact that they are all involved, I think that matters psychologically as well. We aren't meant to do things alone in isolation. Healthy communities work through a sense of shared responsibility. One person has one thing, someone else may have some other thing. One person can listen, another person can teaches, another person is very good at kind of organizing it and putting it all together. Maybe another person is sort of encouraging and cheering on. Some people are serving. And when all of these things, small though they may be individually, but when they're all brought together, something bigger happens and something bigger becomes possible. And this is what's going on in the gospel passage. And then Matthew tells us they all ate and were satisfied. All of them. How about that? This crowd of thousands. They ate and were satisfied. And furthermore, there were 12 baskets left over. Now, how can this be? Think about how different that ending is from the beginning. Like at the beginning of this passage, the disciples began by saying, there's not enough. Yeah. And it ends with, well, more than enough. So much so that everybody ate and was satisfied, and there were 12 baskets left over. So I want to just note here that the psychological lesson isn't this. It's not, if you just have enough faith, every problem that we've got is just going to magically disappear and there'll be leftovers for everybody. That's not how life works. Sometimes we really do experience some hard things. It can really be the case in life that we have loss. We may really, in fact, run out of resources. We sometimes feel like we're doing everything we can and still things may not look like they worked out the way that we hoped for. So the gospel doesn't promise that we will never experience limitation, because we will, because we are limited. But what I think this passage today does is challenge the idea that our limitations make our contribution meaningless, right? So maybe it's true. Maybe you don't have enough. Maybe you don't know enough. Maybe you're actually not strong enough. And maybe you can't fix an entire situation. But what if that is not actually the question? So what if the question is not, do I have enough to solve everything here? What if instead the question is, what do I have? What do I have? And not only what do I have, but what can I do with it? Offer it to Jesus. 5 loaves, 2 fish. It looks insignificant. I got that. And what we have to offer may look insignificant as well, compared to the size of the problem. But in the gospel, this is what the disciples have. And Jesus says, bring it here. And so maybe that is the question for us then. What do we have? When we are feeling overwhelmed, when we're feeling like we are staring down a big problem that we can't deal with, maybe we don't immediately ask, how am I going to solve all of this? Perhaps start smaller. Sit down, take a deep breath. What do I have? What can I do with what I have? Who can I ask for help? What might the next step here be? And perhaps, most importantly of all, how can I place this in God's hands? Because the gospel, it doesn't tell us that we'll always have enough. But it tells us something even more profound, and that is what we have can still be given as an offering. whatever it may be. In the gospel today, 5 loaves and 2 fish, and a willingness to place them in the hands of Jesus. So maybe that's where the miracle begins. Is it that Jesus feeds the 5,000, or is it that they offer what little they have and Jesus accepts? So the next time you find yourself saying something like, I don't have enough, I can't deal with this, when you're looking at a problem that seems overwhelming, just stop for a moment. Don't deny the limitation or pretend that it isn't a real thing, right? But don't stop there. Look again. What do you have? What can I offer? What do I have to bring? What's the next step? What's the next faithful step? Because sometimes it seems to me that the most important thing isn't having enough, but it's being willing to give what you do have. So, in the gospel, 5 loaves, 2 fish, and a willingness to place them in the hands of Jesus. I think that's what it means to be a disciple, and that's what the disciples do. Good stuff to think about. Like I mention time after time, this is as good for me to reflect on and think about as it is for anybody else. So this will be on my heart and mind this week. I hope that you'll think about this as well. And come back next time. We'll have more wonderful things to discuss. So I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer, and this is Gospel Minded. Take care.